When we experience pain, it's not easy to surrender into the pain. It's counterintuitive. Pain has to get to a certain level where it forces you to surrender.
Welcome to the Adventures in Wellbeing podcast. Here we explore the art of living with vitality and curiosity. I'm your host, Damian Chaparro, and today we have a truly inspiring guest, Peter Sterios.
My experience of the subtle body came when I broke my back. I wasn't capable of moving that much. So I had a lot of time to just watch what movement I was capable of.
He is the author of Gravity and Grace. He teaches in person, globally, online at Levity Yoga, and he also leads teacher trainings for those looking for a deeper dive. In this episode, we'll uncover the subtle body, explore breath awareness, the concept of effortless ease. Doesn't that sound good? And we'll look at how his yogic philosophy helped Peter recover from a serious back injury.
Here's the beautiful thing about learning how to create softness in your body on a yoga mat. You can directly apply this relationship with yourself that you're discovering on a yoga mat with the relationships in your life.
Peter also shares his personal journey from a driven type A mindset to embracing softness, humor, and presence in both his practice and life. Together, we'll discuss the transformative power of retreats, meditation, and spirituality in realizing our shared human potential. This is a rich and thoughtful conversation you won't want to miss. As a special bonus, Peter is generously offering our listeners a 30-day premium membership to Levity Yoga, unlimited access to hundreds of recorded practices, an archive of 30-plus monthly workshops, and even one live workshop. To receive this and more, visit our podcast homepage at aro-ha.com/podcast. We'll put a link here. But for now, it's time to enjoy this refreshing conversation with a yogic master.
All right, Peter Sterios, welcome to the sauna sessions.
Thank you for having me. I've never quite been in a podcast room like this before.
Man, just turned on the heat, so we'll see how long we last.
Okay.
Man, I've been enjoying getting into your book, and I thought I might just start us off with a question around the subtle body for those that maybe aren't feeling so subtle today, or maybe are new to the subtle body. What's the value of subtle body work?
I think there's a wisdom that came from these ancient people that we refer to now as yogis in India, where they discovered that we're more than flesh and bone, that when we talk about human beings, we think of that word being as a noun. And what the yogis discovered is that being is actually a verb. It's these qualities of being that they discovered there's basically 5 layers of our body. And the gross physical body is the one that we're familiar with, but there's this energetic body, this psychic, emotional body, this intellect body from your own life experience and wisdom that you gain over the course of a life. And then there's this really esoteric one, which in English is known as the bliss body. And what is that? That is these occasional states of being where it's ecstatic, where we reach a level of inner joy, where our personality dissolves. Even sometimes the environment, physical environment that we're in, we lose connection to it. Some people describe it as an out-of-body experience. Sometimes my own personal experience of it is I'm just so filled with joy, I lose any urgency to relate to my outside world. And so it's a whole inward dwelling state, and you're not even conscious of a body. Like in my experiences with this, it's beyond body. So at this level of conversation with people that are new to yoga, it's just one of those principles that doesn't matter in the beginning of a practice, but eventually as you progress through your practice, it becomes more possible. And the idea of it becomes more possible. So that the subtle body is a map, essentially, that these ancient yogis discovered of how to live optimally, emotionally, physically, even spiritually, if you're aligned to a spiritual life.
I noticed in our session yesterday that there was this, I guess, an attunement to the subtlety of movement, both of breath and flesh, and but also of awareness. Are we walking through the portal of subtle body work anytime we are in presence and in almost like a state of relaxed awareness?
Correct. I have talked about in class yesterday, and as I travel around the world doing these book signings, my experience of the subtle body came when I broke my back. And that convalescent, I wasn't capable of moving that much. So I had a lot of time to just watch what movement I was capable of. And at the most basic level, the only thing I was capable of was the movement of my rib cage when I inhaled and exhaled. And that little movement was literally, in those days, that was what occupied my mind, like entertainment for my mind, because everything else in terms of movement was restricted. There was too much pain in my body to create movement. So in this really unusual situation of being, in a way, trapped in my own body without movement, I started to see the value of paying attention to these subtle sensations of the lungs expanding, and not just in the belly and the chest, but three-dimensional expansion. And particularly, I was guided by my yoga education up to that point that there's a lot of, let's call it subtle body information along the spine. So as I was breathing, I thought, if all the channels of this information is along my spine, why didn't I start breathing towards the back, putting the orientation of my breath towards the back of my body? And that's when things started to happen more quickly. When I started to breathe through the back of my body, I noticed with each practice, the pain in my back was getting less. And then I started to see there were qualities of breathing that were important, like the rhythm of your breath. If I breathe deep but breathe fast, it had a negative effect. I've got more pain. So slowing the breath down was profound for me. And of course, later when writing the book, I found all this science, modern science, about how the vagal nerve tone really what stimulates that parasympathetic response in the body. This is for those of you that aren't familiar with these terms, it's the relaxation response in the body. The most powerful thing we can do to relax is breathe slow. So I was discovering all this in a crisis situation without the intellectual background. It was just like trial and error. And so the more I slowed my breath down, the more ease that there was in my body and the less pain there was in my body. And when I started to integrate movement, more physical movement back into my body, I used what I learned when I couldn't move. And what I found was the anxiety that often comes for me of stretching into a tight muscle completely went away because I wasn't that worried about stretching anymore. It was about the softening that the exhalation breath creates in the body that makes space to move. And you don't need to even think about stretching. The softness creates space. The space creates a feeling of joy, literally, this bliss idea, little bit of bliss. And our bodies, subtle body and physical body, are naturally drawn to this experience of joy. And gravity is this force that allows us to just surrender, and gravity pulls us into the space. So here I was learning about gravity inspired and gravity initiated movement versus mentally imposed muscular effort to move my body. And that, when I go full circle back to these old yoga texts, and I've learned to read some of these old texts, the English translations from Sanskrit. In some of these old translations, I'm now starting to be able to read between the lines and see that, sure enough, that's what these old yogis are talking about. There's a concept of sthiram sukham in Sanskrit, which is effortless effort, essentially. And what is effortless effort? It's this coming together of surrender and intuitive response.
Wow, amazing. I've noticed in my own life with injury, A, it's been an incredible teacher.
Yeah.
And B, I've definitely done the thing of pushing too hard or too fast or just mind-oriented driving, and it hasn't served me well. For somebody who might be feeling pain in their body, I guess I notice that there's some sort of balance between the benefits of movement and engaging with our body in a particular way and the not engaging too much. Any other insights for injuries outside of the spine or maybe just general?
Yeah. You said a lot in that statement. And when I'm sensitive to words that people choose about this culture, Western mostly culture, where we grow up thinking that to succeed or for progress, we have to work hard, play hard, love hard. That's one of my favorite ones. How do you love hard? And in reality, what the yogis understood, and it's survived 8,000 or 9,000 years, depending on who you talk to, up to the present, that this culture of movement inspired by yoga, it's not about force, it's about flow. How do we create that flow in our bodies? Not by stretching, it's usually by softening. And like I said before, creating that space that softness generates in the body, and then letting gravity initially initiate movement, and then experience, or what I call grace. The book is titled Gravity and Grace. So gravity is what we're talking about. Most of us know about it, but in reality, it's an invisible force, right? We're so accustomed to gravity, we forget what it is exactly. It's the nature of Newton, kind of is quoted as being the discoverer of the physics of gravity, but it's the attraction based on the mass of the earth with the mass of our bodies. There's an inherent attraction that mass generates. The recipient of that gravity that keeps us on this planet in a way. The reality, though, is we can, instead of resisting gravity, which most of us grow up in cultures where posture is a result of resisting gravity, lifting up, trying to keep your body erect and the spine straight. Every action in the universe, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And this opposite reaction is something I call levity. And so what the yogis discovered is if we can align ourselves in this directional, gravity is one direction, straight down. If we can put our body in this field of gravity and anatomically bring our bodies to a neutral state, we get a gift. And the gift is this levity. I joked in class yesterday. I grew up in a family that by the time I graduated from university, I wasn't a type A, I was a type AAA. So that mentality created a lot of problems for me when I first started yoga because I was trying to work out hard. And it wasn't until the injury that I discovered how to work out with the inner body, creating softness first. And here's the beautiful thing about learning how to create softness in your body on a yoga mat. You can directly apply this relationship with yourself that you're discovering on a yoga mat with the relationships in your life. The next time you're in a confrontational situation with a spouse, a business partner, a family member, parents or children, instead of meeting their reaction to whatever the situation is calling for, can you meet that situation with softness and openness and, in a way, surrender, but staying fully present as this confrontation tends to build, and just be in that state as best you can with awareness of your own breath and the awareness of this flow of gravity down and levity up in your posture. And I found, just as a habit, that it's powerful and it's very disarming for the situation that you're confronting. The other person on the other end of that equation is hard to get more reactive when you're staying.
There's nothing to push against.
Exactly. So that, let's say the listener here is not an active yoga practitioner, but you have injuries or you have a physically dynamic life. How do you integrate this idea of softness without feeling defeated? And it just takes a little bit of experience, really, and a little bit of guidance. It may be just this conversation with you that creates an inspiration to investigate what this idea of softness and creating this awareness of our inner bodies, our subtle bodies, how that can help someone that's brand new to yoga.
I was just connecting a little bit with the word levity, and I guess we were talking about subtle body. And I was almost in my mind imagining like this entry into, there's the relaxed kind of stillness, this kind of neutral essence quality. And then matching that with levity, in my mind, I was starting to touch on like almost like humor or lightness or playfulness. And then feeling that just for a moment. And it almost felt like the recipe for the bliss.
It is. The Buddha taught this idea of non-attachment. And typically in this culture of working hard, playing hard, loving hard, there's this striving, this attachment of some future state of ourselves that if we achieve that state, we'll be happy. And the Buddha figured out thousands of years ago, that's not exactly how it works. And I think modern yogis have reached a point in their physical development where they're looking for a little bit more. But the other part of the definition is lightness psychologically, or lightness of heart, which implies humor. And for me, I've always integrated a sense of humor into my teaching, with either good humor or sometimes even what my daughter calls dad jokes, bad humor. And the influence that this has on our nervous systems tends to be disarming. It tends to take us out of our heads and into this kind of area around the heart. That is the ultimate state of non-attachment. Being silly is, or not so serious, is detaching from this projection of how you expect to be when you achieve whatever it is you've set out to achieve. And the beautiful thing about this approach is there's plenty of new research that supports this idea of laughter and humor as this perfect tool unique to the human species that allows us to produce biochemicals in our body, that kind of feel good hormones that you've heard about through laughter and through humor, that actually boost our immune systems, that actually reduce inflammation in the body just by laughter, and especially deep belly, guttural laughter.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I read somewhere in one of the research papers that 20 minutes of laughter is like running a marathon for endorphins and in all those kinds of biochemicals in the body. And when I was suffering in that broken back phase of recovery, I found watching YouTube videos of comedians was really amazing. It was like a bio drip of, this adrenaline-like substance that made me feel fantastic and minimized the acute pain that I was in.
It's interesting. There's what I notice in myself is there is this awareness of our ability to shift. There's an awareness of this in yoga, just shifting attention from one point to another. And then life unfolds. And for example, we find ourselves today here in New Zealand, and many yoga studios are needing to close or choosing to close because of restrictions and this whole 18 months that we've lived through. This is a good reason to not be in peace or bliss or any of these states that we're talking about, right? And so it seems to continually want to convince me that no, this problem really is big. And of course it is. So any thoughts on how we balance the moments of our lives? I imagine you having just broken your back, or in any of these moments that really are challenging, or if somebody right now really was feeling a particular dip or a particular low, how do we transition and give energy to that?
I've only been in New Zealand 3 months, so the intensity of what you just described in the United States is dialed up like double, in a way, what's here. And like on a yoga mat, when you meet resistance in your body, where these things that you take for granted as we age, we take for granted that we're able to lift our arm over our head. I've been in situations over the years where lifting my arm because of torn rotator cuffs in my shoulders was almost impossible to get over my head. And when we meet that kind of resistance, we have to change our behavior. We have to look at things more intimately. We can't just ignore them or medicate them or distract away from that experience. And on a yoga mat, I've learned to turn my attention towards it. And again, this word soft, touch that discomfort of resistance as softly as I can with my breath, with initiating movement with gravity and no muscular force, and mentally, instead of it seen as a negative, seeing it as an opportunity to learn more about myself. In this kind of world that we currently live in, we're reaching a point of resistance to the way we are used to living. And we all have opinions about how to move forward. And there's almost like two major narratives here. One of trusting the institutions in our lives that we've relied on in the past and just continue down that path. And then the other is this approach to the resistance that we're meeting in our lives, where we step back and look at what is truly important and something that we all share, irregardless of what side of the fence we are on in terms of specifically to get a vaccine or not to get a vaccine, to accept the mandates or to not accept the mandates. There's huge consequences to the way the world operates by accepting these mandates. It creates division, and division creates, in a way, a weakness. We're strong as a species when we're together, when we work as a community of one. And I think the world over hundreds of years has been slowly moving in that direction, but there's these distractions. I think when we get too far off course, the distraction is a self-correcting mechanism. And that's what I feel like this moment in time is. We may disagree about everything, but there at least is one or two things we can all agree on. And let's start there.
Commonality.
Yeah. And what is something as an example of something that we agree to? The one thing would be like, do we believe in the human species at the most basic level? Do we believe in the goodness of the human heart, for instance? Can we all agree that's true?
Do we value safety?
Do we value safety?
Do we value freedom?
Yeah, freedom. I think the safety question is been manipulated because both sides are saying safety. Both sides are saying, take the vaccine, you'll be safe. And the other side is saying, don't take the vaccine, you'll be safe. And for the people that are saying, don't take the vaccine, you'll be safe, what are they saying to be safe? To watch what you eat, to watch how your lifestyle choices, to orient towards heart-based decisions instead of mind-based decisions. Is that as powerful as taking a vaccine and following institutions that you trusted in the past? That's a personal choice. What is your alignment when it comes, like spiritual people talk often about that they live in the world but not of it. Their orientation is towards a more divine source. And that's perfect for people that are oriented in that direction. I personally am not necessarily aligned to a religion or a divine source, but I am aligned to a spiritual awakening in myself and the potential in everyone's life. And I'm still a work in progress. I'm still working with things as they show up in my life. And when I project my future, there's a lot of work to be done still. I think we all have to look at ourselves with more intimacy and then start like baby steps, moving back into society with this kind of awareness of what works for yourself and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the things that's really helped me is I often just imagine that I am wherever I am And yet I really have no sense of any story of what the world is doing. I have no sense of the environment or where it's at or politics or anything. And I just walk wherever I'm walking. And I can be in a city. I was recently back in the States and I was walking through LA. But then I was like, actually, I'm walking down this street. It's pretty much exactly the same as it was before I left. And when I walk outside, the grass is still growing and the sun is still shining. And I often ground myself in that practice. The other one that actually really helps me is just knowing that really at the core, I think we all want the same thing. And it doesn't matter really how we go about it. Even the angry, spiteful, kind of hurt person is just trying to something to feel better, trying to right the world in some way. I saw some beautiful work. It's an HBO documentary. She was working with psychopaths. And it was fascinating. These psychopaths, like when she would interview these psychopaths that had like multiple personality disorders and the darkest of the dark humans that had killed multiple people and buried them in all kinds of crazy ways, and all the famous like Ted Bundy and stuff like that. Here she was working with them and realizing that they had just had really intense pasts. And that was then manifesting and showing up in whatever way it was. And that just reminded me of this piece of like empathy for wherever someone is and whatever it is that they're coming forward with, their beliefs, their concerns, their worries, is we really all are all just trying to really serve the highest good.
Yeah. And it starts with that, what you described, feeling better. This is the beauty of Hatha Yoga. My first trip to India, I arrived at this Institute of Yoga in central India. And it was right during the master's 70th birthday celebration. So in a sense, it was a good thing because the 70th birthday celebration is a big deal in India. It's when the teachers of any spiritual pursuit, yoga, meditation, etc., when you turn 70, there's a status that 70 brings you where you're now a revered elder. And so there was this week-long celebration where there were yoga demonstrations by the master's top students and then lectures by the master about all these different topics. And on the very last day of this week-long celebrations, they invited reporters from around the world. There were TV cameras, film crews that were doing documentary films, and then about 150 Western yoga students in this small, about the size of the aro-ha room, maybe a little bigger. And typical Indian fashion, this last day was a 4-hour program, essentially with only one bathroom break in the middle, of lectures. And at the end of the second session, the master of yoga said, "Are there any questions?" He had just spent the last 2 hours talking about his life in particular and how yoga found him and how he developed what his teacher had taught him and moved it into his own way of delivering that kind of information to students. The first reporter was this 20-something-year-old from Bombay, Mumbai, worked for the Mumbai Times, the major newspaper, in the most beautiful innocence, but showed that he wasn't really listening or didn't really understand. He asked this master of yoga, who's 70 years old, "Why do you do yoga?" And you could see on the face, because he had a reputation for being really fierce, his face tightened and you could see the heat in his face and his eyes dilating a little bit because I was right in the front row. But then within seconds, it softened. It was like he got an insight of how to answer this without wasting a lot of time explaining himself. And his simple answer, why does he do yoga? "I like the way it makes me feel." And he moved on. Next question. And most of the crowd, including myself, thought that he meant, "I like the way it makes me feel because it makes me feel good. And I like feeling good." But it wasn't until literally years later, thinking about that and in situations that I was experiencing in my own life, that what I believe he meant is, I like the way yoga gives me the ability to feel more intimate into my
Everything.
body. Yeah, everything, exactly. I like the way it makes me feel. I'm capable of feeling the most refined interconnections between mind and body. If I have an angry thought now, I can feel contraction in different places in my body. If I'm frightened, I can feel the locations, but they're different than anger. Fear is a different location in my body. And I have the tools through the practice of yoga and through conscious breathing to diffuse that contraction and, in a way, diffuse the anger or diffuse the fear. And that, to me, is the beauty of that feeling sense. We're not going to get away from pain or resistance or limitation, but we can adjust our relationship to it. And when I was listening to you talk about your ability to just walk down a street and realize everything's the same, but different, it made me think of another little personal story in my life. About a year ago, we were starting to get ready for this move, and we were starting to think about selling things. And I had this car detailer come over to detail my car. And he came over, and I'd met him before, but I'd never really had a conversation. We start talking, and he tells me a little bit about his life. He was homeless. He was a drug addict. He had a successful life and career as a musician, and it went south on him. He got a divorce. But this man saw him living in a creek and came down to him and said, "Do you want to have a job?" And he was a car detailer. And he said, "I'd love a job." The man that introduced him eventually sold him the business because he was old and retiring. And he left him with a mantra. And this car detailer was talking to me about mantras, and I wouldn't even have known he knew about yoga or what a mantra was, which is basically a subvocal phrase that you repeat over and over again to rewire your subconscious. And the mantra, impermanence surrounds me.
Oh, wow.
And that mantra has stayed with me ever since. No matter what state we're currently in, it's going to change. And can you be patient to allow that change to unfold? And instead of just being a witness to it, can you intuitively respond to each situation that arises that confronts your normal state of being? And that's a personal thing, understanding how intuition works and then trusting it. And it's like a trial and error process. You get better at intuition with time. I told you at breakfast this morning, it's like humor. You get better at humor over time. Your timing gets better. Your punchlines get better. Your setup gets better.
Who have been your most formative teachers, and how do you see the role of teacher for the householder? Should we all have somebody that we see as a particular teacher, or?
I 100% agree that we should all find a teacher, but it's the type of teacher we find that's critical. I can think of 3 people in my life that have heavily influenced my growth. I grew up Catholic, and I was traumatized in Catholicism at Catholic school, and everything that you would read about, I experienced as a child. And I came away as an adult just wanting to have nothing to do with that organized religion, even other types of religion. It created a little trigger in me until I met this gentleman called Father Charlie. And Charlie Moore was the youngest district attorney of Santa Cruz, California ever. And 3 years into his role as district attorney, he had a spiritual awakening. He quit law and he went to seminary school and he became a Catholic priest. Except he was a very unusual Catholic priest because he talked about the Buddha a lot, because he'd done a lot of research. He talked about pre-civilization societies, which were based on dreams that he had and also archaeological digs that he had visited, and talked to the scientists working on these sites about the cultures of these people that are millions of years old and what their day-to-day life must have been like. And he intuited what their spiritual lives were like. And the other thing that got him in trouble with the hierarchy of the Catholic Church is he talked a lot about extraterrestrials. So the Catholic Church appreciated who he was and his following, but didn't want him in any major city. So they relocated him to this little town in California called Pacific Grove. And at the time, it was like 10,000 people. And they wouldn't even give him a church. He had to conduct services in his house. And it was Father Charlie that restored my faith in the mystical traditions of the Christian religion, because there's some amazing mystics in the Christian religion that actually went to India and studied yoga and studied these mind-body practices. Number two was this Australian yoga teacher, Shandor Remete. And he was the first person that inspired me as a man to man the potential of the physical practices of yoga. And right up until the end, when our relationship ended, he gave me something. And in the book, I talk about what he gave me when we split, which is priceless. And then the last teacher is an Indian gentleman called Goenka. And this man was a meditation teacher in India. And while I was living there, he was still alive. A coincidence allowed me to go to one of his 10-day retreats, where we sit from about 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, with breaks only every hour to an hour and a half to use the toilet, or a break at lunchtime to have a short meal. So sitting 12 plus hours a day is pretty intense, and it takes a certain fortitude, but I just buckled down and did it. That period of time, that short 2-week period of time, taught me more about what yoga was trying to teach me than the first 15 years of my yoga practice. I made the recognition of the inseparable nature of mind and body, how our thoughts affect our tissues and movement of our tissues affect our thoughts. And it's nice that it's a kind of a give and take relationship. It's not mind over matter. In a way, it's mind into matter. So we make that connection, and matter influences the mind.
That's Goenka, the lineage holder for Vipassana.
Correct.
Powerful. I got the recorded version of Goenka because he'd passed away by the time I did Vipassana, but also had a really powerful experience there. And for anyone listening, if you've studied a bit and you have the basics down and you're interested in the direct experience of some of these teachings, Vipassana is definitely powerful. I know that a lot of people have a hard time with it because they really accept anyone to come and have an experience in it. May take just a little bit of preparation or groundwork to be able to grasp or to be open enough to the message.
Yeah, I think what I've learned from my yoga teachers and my meditation teachers is meditation and yoga are really simple ideas, but they're very complex subjects. That paradox runs throughout it. My path as a yoga teacher, lineage of innovation, if you look at 3 or 4 generations of teachers that I'm in direct lineage with, they all were innovators. They all took what their teachers gave them, processed it, and then it to the students that they came into contact with. And in a way, I feel like trying to create simplicity where everyone can approach yoga with the same connection to the subtle body is important. And I've gone about the last 15 years of my life, and the book is essentially, I joked in class yesterday, this physical book is all the things that I ever wanted to learn about yoga in one place. And I refer to it as my external hard drive. Like when the internal hard drive of my mind gets full, but there's information that I'm lacking because I've lost a connection to it, I have this book now to refer to that kind of reconnects me with some of those chips, let's call them memory chips in the hard drive. And it's a great analogy. The book is really a useful tool.
What has the role, you and I met, we were trying to figure out the exact year, but it was somewhere around 2006 or 7 or something like that. And I was on one of your retreats. What's been your experience about just the tool of retreat?
It's like turning the Wi-Fi off at home. It's like going out into the forest without any internet connection. So what does that give our minds? It gives our minds space. And initially, the space is filled with random thoughts. But eventually, those random thoughts fall away. That if we keep our attention tethered to some present moment experience, what are the present moment experiences that are easy? You had the breath. And how do you keep your attention with the breath? What are the qualities of breath that we can pay attention to? The rhythm of our breath. So we can count, let's say internally count to ourselves, a rhythm. Let's suggest 3 to 4 second inhale, 3 to 4 second exhale. See how long you can just keep your attention focused on the rhythm of your breath. The other thing is the sound of our breaths. Most of us breathe with nasal sound, but yogis discovered a sound that was deeper in the back of the throat. And to experience that, it's like with a mouth open trying to fog up a window or fog up a mirror at home with your breath. It's a raspy sound. The yogis discovered that sound was a present moment experience, and breathing just through the nose, you could create it as well. And to tether your attention to that sound of the breath not only keeps your mind in present moment, but bioenergetically, it builds friction and heat in the body. And this heat is also useful as a tool to promote circulation, both physical circulation in terms of fluid and air in and out of the lungs, but also psychological circulation. Another present moment experience is pain. It's hard to feel pain in the past or pain in the future. So what is pain? Pain is the language the body uses to communicate imbalance. That's all it is. No matter what the circumstance, the tragic situation that created the pain that you're experiencing in that moment, can you see pain as just a messenger telling you, hey, this part of your body's out of balance? And that's where intuition comes in. But if you listen at that first onset of pain, usually the remedy of being out of pain is quick. However, our culture isn't wired that way. When we feel pain, we try to mask it with either self-medication or prescribed medication or distraction or mind over matter, thinking of something else that keeps our mind out of that pain. And that just perpetuates the cycle in a way. And the body makes the pain get louder and louder until you eventually are forced into a no return situation. And that's what my broken back was about. I couldn't rely on drugs. I couldn't rely on the ways I had moved in the past to create health and wellness. I had to come up with a new way to move. And it started literally with the building block of breath and gravity.
You also, we touched a little bit on this before, but this ability to welcome pain, to be with pain in a different way. And then also there's such a powerful part of it, which is in the letting go, like particularly emotionally, but I think even physically, it translates that subtleness, that softness, that kindness, that surrender that you're touching on plays such a huge role in allowing things to pass through us and for the energy to clear again. Because it does seem, particularly with emotional pain, it seems so easy for some reason for our neurology to hold on to those past experiences and just lock them in and just let them be the way we see life.
When we experience pain, it's not easy to surrender into the pain. It's counterintuitive. Pain has to get to a certain level where it forces you to surrender. What is the trust in? That your body is a miracle. Your body, when you really think about the science of the physical body, even the sense of sight, your eyeballs are the most amazing miracle there is. And the skin is also an amazing miracle. It is not just the bag that holds all your organs and bones. It's intelligence that's wired into the connective tissue of the body. And the connective tissue of the body is wired into every major organ, actually every organ, gland, every major joint in the body, even every bone in the body. Connective tissue is connected. Modern science is talking about that connective tissue has channels of communication in the same way that the nervous system communicates electromagnetically through these cell receptors and parts of your brain, and then translates that back to trigger certain neurons in your muscles and in your joints to create whatever it is you're trying to do. Connective tissue has an independent that works on a mechanical vibration, like a wave energy. And it's the missing key for the limitations that the typical anatomical model of our bodies of muscles, joints, tendons, etc., have gaps with the mind-body connection. because they, in a way, the traditional view of science with the anatomical reality of our bodies, it's tied to pretty much muscle and bone. But with this connective tissue model, the emotions affect the mobility of our connective tissue. And that cliche saying the issue is in the tissues, it's based on science now. And science is exploring how do we create more mobility in connective tissue. And before I saw the science, what I discovered was stretching is overrated. Softening is the way we influence the channels of connective tissue opening to transmit information that guides mobility. We can move through pain without referring to muscle or alignment at all, just by using softness and letting gravity inform the movement, and accepting that your steps towards movement are literally baby steps when you use gravity as the catalyst. Each cycle of breath, on the exhalation, gravity goes to work in that surrendering, here's the surrender word again, of the exhale, and gravity, millimeter by millimeter, moves you closer to physical movement. To me, that's the most powerful thing about this approach, to use pain not as a setback, but as a gift. When you make that shift, that the pain you're feeling in the long run is a gift, then gratitude fills in. And what does that gratitude produce? As I mentioned in class yesterday, gratitude is that energy, gratitude and kindness is that energy that opens up the primary channel in your body that facilitates movement and mobility, especially in the spine. That's a big thing to come to, that transition. And personally, when I reflect back on the worst things that ever happened in my life, death, I've just had a couple deaths this year with COVID and natural things. And the loss of that person that I was extremely close to, there was a real gift in that loss, that through the grieving process, it awakened me to something that was profound and will be with me the rest of my life. Divorce, powerful one. The worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to me. Back breaking, severe spinal injury. Best thing that's ever happened to my teaching as a yoga teacher. So they're sincere gifts in my life.
Well, I'm feeling my gift of skin sweating at the moment. It's about 80 degrees centigrade in here. And we were getting into such an interesting space there. Do you have a memory of where spirituality began for you? And any thoughts about the word? Like, it can be loaded, I think, for people, even the word spirituality, but how do you see that in your life?
I had a notion of what spirituality was when I first started yoga. Like, I read the books about spiritual beings and these magical abilities that these ancient yogis had. And I related that to, because of my Catholic upbringing, I related it to something spiritual versus it's religious. And I was turned off to religion until I met Father Charlie. However, those images that I had of spirituality implied in a way that I would achieve some kind of extrasensory perception. And to a degree, I've achieved that extrasensory perception. I can imagine states of being beyond my 5 sensory organ body. However, in and of itself, I don't relate that to spirituality. I relate it to pure human potential, that the human species has evolved into the ability to move into this sensory world, the 6th sense of intuition, and as I jokingly talk about in the book, the 7th sense of humor, where we create levity in our bodies psychologically. Spirituality to me is just realizing the full human potential. And I don't really identify with anything spiritual. And the first time it really grounded in me was the spinal injury, where there was nothing I could do in that moment. I had to completely surrender to the moment. And what showed up in that moment of surrender? Intuition. Where does intuition come from? I believed intuition comes from a higher source of intelligence. Where is that coming from? I don't know, to be frank. I listened to the comedian George Carlin. He's a sun worshiper. He was a sun worshiper. And I love the way he talks about God and the sun. And it reflects in a way my own understanding. When you think about the sun, what is it? It's this miracle of intense energy and light that somehow is self-sustaining for billions of years. And there's billions of them around the universe.
Amazing, eh? Controlled nuclear kind of explosion.
And what was the source of all that? The Big Bang. What was the source of the Big Bang? These are the kinds of questions that my mind drifts towards with spirituality.
The great mystery, eh?
Yeah. Being in a way comfortable with the paradox of that mystery.
Man, Peter, so good to hang out with you, brother.
Same.
Yeah, man. You mentioned to me that you're 65, and I'm looking at a man that's healthy, that sits in lotus, that is light, and that is enjoying his life. So you're obviously doing something very right.
Thank you.
And yeah, I appreciate your guidance on the path.
Thank you. I appreciate your presence in my life.
Thanks, brother.
You're welcome.
Hi there. If you're a return listener and you enjoy this podcast, I will make a deal with you. If you hit that subscribe button and tick the like button, we promise, the team here at Adventures in Wellbeing Podcast, to do everything we possibly can to create the most epic content designed to make your life healthier, more vibrant, and more centered.